What is up, kinfolk? So today I came across a video of Jordan Peterson sitting down with his wife, and they're talking about submission and the importance of submission. I think that especially today in the modern dating and even marriage, I feel like that is something that is lost, especially when it comes to women. We are very against the aspect of submission, that submission makes you weak. Anyone who submits to their husband is basically a slave, is basically a tool. The reason I think that submission for a lot of women and why they view it that way is somewhat of the lack of male relationships and even some of the male relationships that they've been exposed to. In regards to my family, I had a conversation with my mom a while ago, and she talked about how she had the privilege of knowing her great-great-grandmother and down. The conversation was about relationships, and she said her great-great-grandmother had a man. Now, she didn't know if he passed away, if he ran off, if they were divorced. She's like, but I know that she did not have a man present in her life. When it comes to her great-grandmother, she was divorced, and she did have a boyfriend. Her grandmother, she had been divorced, had a boyfriend, and had 2 baby daddies, and that's not to even think about all the other men that she was also in connection with and who she also had relationships with during that time. And then when it comes to her mother, my grandmother did not get married until my mom was 18. So when you talk about 5 generations of women, how they're talking, and even how seeing as a child how these relationships are going down, how that's going to affect you, especially when it came to my grandmother, my mom's mom. There was a lot of bad stuff when it came to men, seeing men coming in and out and all this stuff. The thing that made my mom different and how my mom and my dad just celebrated 34 years of marriage this year, I would say has to do with God. My mom was not a Christian, and she definitely, though she's not a perfect person, that is what she would say made her stay with my father for as long as they have been together. And him, same exact thing. I believe that parents do, whether inadvertently or advertently, teach their children what life is going to be like when it comes to relationships. Whether they tell them about it or whether their child views it, they get a sense of what relationships are and how you should and should not be from a relationship based on viewing the parent. Submission is very difficult for women because seeing men as a revolving door, seeing women being taken advantage of, having multiple generations of women who did not have men in their lives or who did not commit to them, that does something to a woman. And even how you teach your daughter how men are might come from a place of bitterness and hurt. I also think too, when it comes to submission, it's not only on the women. I think a lot of men unfortunately are not people that you would want to submit yourself to, and unfortunately these women get with these men, and it doesn't work out. So that's just my take on submission before I even watch the video. But we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna see how Jordan and his wife talk about submission and how it's helped in their marriage. But before we get into the video, if you are not subscribed to this channel, and why wouldn't you be, go ahead and subscribe. Hit that bell notification so you get notified every single time I make a video. So without further ado, I'm not going to delay it any longer. Let's get into it.
Of submission of a woman to a man in the context of a marriage socially repulsive.
Well, I think it's because it's first of all, distinguishing between submission and involuntary slavery isn't simple. And the word submission has connotations of involuntary slavery. And if you believe that involuntary slavery is wrong, then insofar as submission indicates that, it's also wrong. I also think that it's an inelegant way of conceptualizing the relationship. So I was writing about this today. So this is quite interesting. So in the second chapter of Genesis, Adam is characterized as, in part, as the spirit that conceptualizes and perceives categories. So he names the animals. He names the distinguishable creations of God. He applies conceptual order to them. So God gives, or Adam gives the animals the names. And so that's the construction of an epistemology, let's say a conceptual representation of an underlying reality. That's Adam's domain. Now, as soon as that's announced in the story, another announcement takes place, and that is that Adam, who's characterized in this manner, he's lacking a partner. So the mere ability to impose order in that manner, let's say with verbal categorization, is insufficient. And as soon as it's announced as the domain of Adam, then his lack of a counterpart is instantly brought into the story. And the term for his desirable counterpart in the King James Version is helpmeet.
I do believe that women and men are different. So when it comes to a helpmeet, a lot of red pillars will say that, outside of reproduction, a woman is practically worthless and practically useless. I don't need her for anything other than that. Being a man, having a man brain, and how y'all think, men do stupid stuff. They're reckless. But that's not how the female brain thinks about certain things. And having that back and forth of having somebody who wants to do something, let's say reckless, and someone who's like, that's not a good idea. Perfect example is like if you're out with your boys are going to encourage that behavior. They're going to be like, hey, bro, like you should totally do this. But if the women were around, you'd be like, hey, yo, we can't talk about that because there's a certain type of thing about men and women that are different in terms of how we view the world, in terms of how we process information. So I think that it is a great balance to have, and it's not just reproduction. Men, even who say they aren't dating anymore, I would argue they would tell you that, hey, when I was with a good woman or when things were good, these are some of the things that she offered me besides sex. Because outside of sex, there are certain things that a woman can offer, such as companionship, because the companionship of your homies I won't say it's not sufficient. It's sufficient because it's your homies, and I think men do need that. But there's something different about when you are with a man and when you're with a woman. I was single for 26 years of my life before I had my first relationship. Being there for someone, having someone be there for you, it's something that I never got I get it from my family, but it's just a different type of feeling. My relationship now, even when things are tough, I would say that it's worth it when we do work things out, when we do see eye to eye, when I can be supportive for him and when he can be supportive for me. Like I said, I can get slightly from my family, I can get from some of my friends, but it's just something different when it's someone who is outside of you, who sees you for you and can accept you for the good, the bad, and the ugly, and who's willing to work with you in that, and simultaneously seeing somebody working through the good and bad and the ugly with them and being supportive and wanting to build a life with them. There's something different. There's something magical about that.
And that's an archaic English translation of a Hebrew word, a phrase which I can't remember at the moment. It's Ezra, and then there's another word. But it means something like beneficial adversary. And Ezra actually has the connotation of warrior as well, which I just discovered today. So in the Old Testament, for example, the military powers upon whom Israel calls to aid them in times of battle are described with the word Ezra. And so the application of the word Ezra to Adam's helpmeet is the attribution of something like the spirit of the warrior to the woman. And then this idea of beneficial adversary, I was talking to Ben Shapiro about this issue, and he was the one who told me that the Hebrew from which the word helpmeet was derived means something closer to beneficial adversary. And I've been thinking about this a lot, what that means.
One of the things that my dad taught me, and one of the things that I try to do my hardest when I'm in a relationship, is men fight the war out there. I'm supposed to fight the war in here, such as the war in the home. And it's both us working at it, like, for sure. Like, it's not just the woman only holding it down in the home. But when he's out there fighting and being a warrior, so to speak, for our house and making sure that our house is taken care of, whether from a monetary standpoint, whether from a protection standpoint, from whatever, I'm supposed to help be the warrior of the house, and that's different. Even in the army, there are different roles that everybody has to play, but it doesn't take away from each other's roles whatsoever. So the aspect of being a helpmeet, the aspect of submitting to my husband, the aspect of being a peaceful warrior in my home is another way of combating and fighting the demons and fighting the evil and fighting the enemies that would come against my guy and try to come against my household, try to come against my kids. If I just pop out babies and I'm not doing anything else, I think any guy would have a huge problem with that. If you're having a really hard day at work and it's just like, I'm just there for sex and I'm not there to be like listening to you, helping you problem solve, helping to ease your mind, you're not getting any of that thing from me, but just that is going to be problematic. Even before there's kids, it's just you and me. So if I'm only bringing sex to the table, there's a problem. If I'm only bringing cooking to the table, there's a problem. I should be feeding you not only physically and helping your body, but even spiritually, even mentally, become a better person, become a better man, and vice versa. Being able to do that even when times get hard, when things are not going as smoothly as we would both like, and understanding and knowing that the battle is hard, but the war isn't over, and this is a battle that we're just going to have to struggle with, and eventually we'll turn the tides. And being able to stick around for that person in those times is what I think is submission at the end of the day.
So imagine you're playing a game. Okay, so let's try to figure out what a game is first. And one of the things that characterizes a game is you want to play it, right? If it's a game, it has to be voluntary. You have to have signed up for it. And so that's useful. If it's enforced, if you have to play it, it's not a game. It's certainly not a good game. But so voluntary participation is the indicator of a good game. And then you might say, well, what's a good game apart from that? And you might say, well, it's a good game if I can win. And that seems obvious because what you will strive to do if you're playing a game generally is to win. And so then you might think, well, that's the point of the game. And but then you might think, well, if that's the point of the game, when you set up a game, like let's say you're playing chess, you want to find someone who's never played chess in their life, and you just want to kick the hell out of them. And you might object, well, that wouldn't be any fun.
Yes.
And that's pretty interesting, because if the point of the game is the victory, then why not set yourself up with an opponent that you can just stomp, and then you win. And it also doesn't even require much effort, so much the better. But everyone knows that's not desirable. It's not any fun. It's not a good game. And so what do you need for the game to be good? And so then imagine instead that you're playing something like one-on-one basketball.
You need a compatible enough partner to make it so that it is a challenge for you to win, but simultaneously there's a level of fun to it. I like this. I like this comparison. This is really good. I like that.
And so then imagine instead that you're playing something like one-on-one basketball, and you could pick your opponent, your optimal opponent. And you might think, well, who would my optimal opponent be? And we know the answer to that. We know what people will pick if you give them the opportunity, and what they will generally pick. You have a shot at winning the particular game, but while you're attempting to win the particular game, you're expanding the domain of skill that makes you a skilled player in that game. And to do that, you need a beneficial adversary, and a beneficial adversary is someone who's matched against you at approximately or slightly exceeding your current level of skill. And that's what you want in a partner. That's what you want in a marital partner.
And even when it comes down to that level of skill, any sports people out there know this. There is the physical game, and then there's the mental game. There is a certain level of physicalness in terms of your actual skill that we could see, the old school tropes, being able to provide, being able to cook, being able to clean. That's the physical skill that everybody sees. But then there's the mental game. There's a mental game of marriage, which I feel is not talked about a lot. How you're able to speak to your husband when he's down. How you're able to speak to your wife when she's down. When he is having aspirations and talking about how he wants life to be, and you talk negatively into that situation, you talk negatively into his life, that has mental implications. Because when you even talk about kids, if you're constantly telling a kid he's worthless, he'll never be anything, one of two things will happen. Either that kid fights against that and tries their hardest, but on average we see kids who are told you'll never be anything, that you're worthless, you'll never amount to anything. They end up taking that and internalizing it and thinking that, well, everybody's telling me this, so this must be true, and they take it as truth. As a wife and as a husband, when it comes to submission, you need to have a level of having a mental game that does not tear your partner down. It's not the intimidation factor of standing over them. I think that's also what a lot of people attribute to submission, is having someone towering over you after like they just owned your behind. On average, when you're having a good game, having that level of mental like fortitude is important when it comes to your relationship. And I think that that is something that is not talked about, that is not pushed. When all the cooking and the cleaning is done, how do you mentally take care of your guy? If a physical representation of like rubbing his head is something that helps him mentally, then do that. You know what I mean? Having certain conversations, talking and speaking life into him rather than death, in terms of like speaking into his dreams and speaking into his aspirations.
That's what you need, is you need to be set against each other in something like an iterating dynamic of cooperation and competition. Both of those, the competition in some sense drives you forward, and the cooperation makes the entire enterprise sustaining and productive. Now that's conceptualized, by the way, and this is extraordinarily interesting and very much worth knowing. It's conceptualized this is one manner of mythological conceptualization. The Christian sacralization of marriage is predicated on the idea that the union, the proper union of a man and woman, offers the opportunity for the emergence of something like the spirit of the Logos. And so that's the word made flesh. And so what that means is that a dynamic can be set up between the participants in the relationship. And that dynamic is something like the truthful exchange of redemptive information aimed at maximizing the quality of the relationship. Right? So that would mean that if you're a wife, you're subordinate to the aim of maximizing the relationship, abetted by the willingness to exchange truthful information. And so then there's an emergent spirit that characterizes the interaction of the two people in the marriage, and that is symbolically represented by the Logos. Right? And that's the sacralization of marriage. Then you might say, well, what does the Logos mean in some deep sense, which is a very good question. And so one of the, for better or for worse, right? That's the ethos of marriage. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that you and your wife or your husband will face the ultimate catastrophes of life together. And that if you do that properly, you'll face them together voluntarily. And if you do that in the right spirit, then you'll face the ultimate catastrophes of life voluntarily, aimed at the good, with your eyes open, well, interacting in a truthful manner. And that will, if you do that, that will be the best antidote to the catastrophe of life that you can possibly manage. And so that's a way better vision than, and what did you call it? Well, the question was that the woman be
Submission.
Submission to her husband. Now, each of you should jointly submit to the spirit that makes your relationship redemptive and dynamic. Mm-hmm. And that's a much better way of thinking about it. So there's an element of submission in some sense that's involved, but it's not unidirectional, and it's never been conceptualized that way in classic thought, not by people who thought deeply about such things. And you submit, in a marriage, but to what? Well,
that's the question.
Both of you, if you have any sense, submit to the absolute necessity of maintaining a positive relationship over the longest possible term in the most diverse possible situations, right? Because you're going to experience great joy together and also great catastrophe. And so, and you're in it for the long run in principle. And so both of you have to submit yourself to the necessity of acting toward one another in a manner that makes that long-term iterated play most productive.
You have to know the strengths and the weaknesses of your partner, and it requires you to be very selfless. You said one-on-one, but let's put it as a team aspect. It's like you and your partner, or it would be like me and my husband going against like life, right? I have to recognize that I am terrible inside the key. I'm a great 3-point shooter, but inside layups, I'm absolutely trash at. If my guy is putting up all the points and he's just doing layup after layup after layup, I have to be selfless enough to be like, hey, listen, today I'm not on it. I'm going to give the ball to you. Having that trust in each other and not having it be a competition to where, like, I put up all these points and you ain't doing nothing but just passing me the ball. You need to start shoot. Like, you know, it shouldn't be infighting within the team. It's recognizing that we both have our strengths. We both have our weaknesses. Some are going to be off days. Some are going to be on days. But having a selfless nature, we are going to both do what we think is best for each other. We're going to have, like you said, some truths about it. If you're not doing well, and you're not being able to pull your own weight, being like, okay, that's fine. I'm going to pull our weight. I'm going to do my best for the team right here as well. And I'm not going to hold that against you. I'm not going to go into the next game being like, oh, yeah, well, I put up all the points. He didn't do nothing last game. And, you know, forget him. We look at the stats after a basketball game, like this person put up this many points. But at the end of the day, they're like, our team won. It's not like I put up all these points and, yeah, these suckers didn't do any work. It's like, no, like, I wouldn't be able to do what I do if it was not for my team passing me the ball. If it wasn't for my team believing that I could make these shots. I think even a level of submission too, and this is where it comes down to men, and they're probably not going to like when I say this, is knowing when you need to sit down for the good of our relationship and for the good of what we are trying to build and what we're trying to create. If you think that you are in trouble, you should have a woman who can understand that and be like, okay, babe, you're down right now. You're telling me you're down right now. That's fine. I'm willing to pick up and put on extra work to help once again facilitate this relationship. Not coming from a bitterness standpoint later when it's like, I've been doing all this work. And I think that that's also just as important, is knowing when your time is up and you need to sit down and let the other person take a lead, to let them take the lead. But knowing that you can always come back and you could always, like, you know, help. That's what I think marriage should be. This is coming from a person who also is not married. I want to be clear. But having people in my life who have been in long-term marriage relationships who are healthy and in some aspects are unhealthy, I have come down to this belief. All in all, I don't think submission is a bad thing. I think that submission is a great thing. I think like anything that is good, it can be exploited. When you have a happy meeting of the minds, like Jordan said, we both understand that this is what we want, and for the common good of our relationship, when things go bad, we're going to do the best that we can, for better or for worse, to push forward. I think that is a good thing. But Kinfolk, let me know what you think in the comment section below. But as always, I love you, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.